This is session 8, and I'm almost 100% positive it's going to be our last session on giving. We do have a lot of pages to get through, but I think we'll get through all of them today, which means we kind of need to hit the ground running here. So I want to tell you two things we're going to do today, and I think they're pretty simple, but these are the two things we're going to do to wrap up the office of giving. The first thing is, I want, for the last time, as we talk about giving, to emphasize the focus on godly motives behind all of our giving. And I'm going to give you some examples of that today. Some of those you might look at and say, how in the world do I do that with charity? I don't understand how to do that. We're going to talk about that and kind of iron that out. The second thing we're going to do is then we're going to take a look at the different ways that we give. I think everybody kind of already has those in mind, so I think we'll be able to cover those pretty quickly, and we'll do a lot of that in your note taker. And so the first thing I want to do is just remind you of where we are. We are in that first form of doctrine, and that is Romans chapter 12, verses 3 through 8. And we broke that down into the pattern of edification, which means we saw verse 3 being that godly thinking, verses 4 and 5, that godly living, and then verses 6 through 8 is the godly labor. And look, can't labor unless you really got that skill down of the godly thinking and the godly living, and then you apply that to a particular operation that God wants to accomplish, and that is what separates it from being just godly living to godly labor. Now we're in verse 8. We're coming toward the end of the form of doctrine here, and so we should expect that what we're going to hear as we're in this section on godly labor, that we're going to hear something about the operation that God wants us to accomplish. What is it that He's really trying to get us to do? And so, and the first and most obvious of those operations that God intends to accomplish through those that give is the ability for the assembly, this local church, to maintain itself in all of its various operations. Now, let me just tell you what it is that we have here. And it's not necessary for everybody in the world to know this, but look, this building is paid for, so we're not making a building note. But what we have is we have utilities. In the wintertime, we have gas heat, and then, of course, we have electricity year-round and water bill. My salary, and then once a year, we make an insurance payment. And I'm not sure when that is, Linda. September, okay. Anyway, and then anything, the only things that would come up other than that is if we had to do repairs to something. One of the air conditioners went out or something happened, and it's part of the equipment, and we had to fix that. Those are the things that Bible Fellowship Church is responsible for, and those are legitimate. I believe those are legitimate expenses for a local church today, and of course it takes finances to make that happen. By the way, I just want to say here at the outset, nobody is more uncomfortable talking about money than I am. If you go back and listen to all the lessons that I have done in the past, I have taught hundreds and hundreds of lessons in a row without ever talking about giving. There is this mindset, though, when people, anytime a preacher or a pastor gets up and talks about giving, they think that's all preachers talk about is money. Well, there are guys that do that. That's all they talk about. But I tell you what, I really believe that in the I don't know how many years I've been here. We've lived here for 13. How many? 6? So 15 years? In the 15 years I've been here, I don't know, except teaching through Romans, if I have ever done a sermon on giving. It's been pretty rare. So I just want to say, I know there are guys that are always doing that, and I'll tell you why. Because they're trying to get the bills paid. And so so they talk about it. I really don't like to do that, But this is an office. And this is an office that's necessary. And so anyway, so we're going to talk about it today, and then we're going to move on. So here's the question. Is it God's intention for local assemblies to exist today in the dispensation of grace? The answer is absolutely yes. And here's what we find. We know that because everywhere the Apostle Paul went, he established local churches. And in those local churches, you know what? God expected the work of the ministry to be carried out. He did not create anything else to do that. So the next question is, if it's God's intention for local assemblies to have a pastor, then is it also his intention that those assemblies provide for an income for the pastor? And the answer is yes. If you go back into some of the things that Paul said about that, and I chose not to include that in this lesson. I had a note here that said I may want to do a reservoir of knowledge on the financial support of the bishop. I don't think that actually wound up in your notes. I don't think I put it in there. Maybe I did, but from what I'm looking at in my notes, I don't think I did. But what I want to say is, you know what? And I'm talking, but I'm looking here. It says we're not connected, and I'm wondering if I lost it or just keep it going. So anyway, the answer is yes. And I was going to say, when Paul talks about that, he likens the pastor to an ox. Not flattering. He talks about don't muzzle the ox that works in the field. Why couldn't he, use the racehorse or something? It had a little dignity to it. But anyway, the ox. And but anyway, everywhere that Paul established churches, he ordained elders. He installed them as leaders of those local churches. And he also wrote inspired scripture to talk about how to care for those that had the edification office of pastor or bishop in those local churches. The point here is, in spite of the tendency for people to think that preachers are only after money, the truth is, like everything else that we do today, it just takes money to do it. And I think everybody kind of understands that. I really don't think there's anybody that's part of the MBI family or that's part of this assembly remotely that questions that. I think everybody understands that, and so I feel pretty at ease to be able to say it just that way. Now, as the practical gift of giving is performed, we need to do that out of the doctrine, no matter in what way that we're giving. We understand that we're laboring with God and we're accomplishing something that He wants done. It's His intention for the local church to be the pillar and ground of the truth. And in order for that to happen, then the local church has to exist in a way that is visible and impactful to the community of which it's a part. That makes sense, doesn't it? In other words, this church right here, now I hope we're having an impact all around the world from folks that are following us on Zoom and getting all those materials and participating. But we also need to be the pillar and ground of the truth right here in Monahans, Texas, and that is the goal that God has for this assembly. And so that laboring with our Father in that way is the thing that we should have in view, and we should want that to be a reality. So let me give you these reasons for giving, and this is going to take you to your note taker. And let me just, not really sure why this went away on my screen. The internet came up on my, okay. You got that? Do you see that? Okay. I couldn't see that at all for a minute. Okay, so let's talk about on your note taker. Here are the godly reasons for giving. Then we're going to make some practical application of it. So why do we give? First of all, we give because we love God. And why do we love Him? Well, I could have put a bunch of things down there. I just chose a couple because, first of all, He adopted us as His sons and daughters, and we're in this great relationship with Him. And by the way, I just want to talk about that for a moment, about why I chose that one. Everybody talks about disciples and discipleship. And where they really get that is when they go back to Israel's program and they try to do that. Does everybody see the page that we're on here? What page are we on in your book? 57. Okay. 67? 67. My mistake. So the reason I chose that is because everybody makes a big deal about disciples and discipleship. Do you realize that your Heavenly Father has put you in a relationship with Him that is way beyond just being a disciple? You're a son or a daughter. I mean, that's incredible, isn't it? And so that's one of the reasons that we love Him. Another one is for offering us this education, whereby His wisdom gets installed in us. That doesn't just make us really smart, it makes us godly. It makes us like Him. It means that we think like Him and we live like Him. And so that's the thing about that. Here's the next reason for godly giving, and that is because you love the saints in this local assembly. And so in the parenthesis I say, because you value and esteem them. You want them to be edified because you realize that you are members one of another in the same body. And that ought to have meaning for you. So the first thing that we do is we give because we love God, because of what He's done for us, and then we love the other saints. And not because, you know what, we just click with them or they have a personality that we, kind of find easy, but it is because we value and esteem them as part of this body. The next thing is, the godly reason for giving is because we want to see God's operations accomplished. In this case, His operation is the sustenance and maintenance of the local church. Why is that important? Because He has ordained the local church to carry out the work of the ministry. And if there's no local church, then there's no work of the ministry. And so if what God is doing and what He wants to accomplish is important to us, then that is a godly reason for giving. Now let me give you the next one. Another sonship reason for giving is in response to the measure of faith, which is right here. Remember, this was our godly thinking. For a man ought not to think of himself more highly than he ought to think, but to think soberly, according as God hath dealt to every man the measure of faith. And I told you back then, what God wanted you to be thinking about, what ought to be in your mind, is that I'm going to be laboring with Him in some way. He's going to give me an opportunity to really get involved in His business. And I'm putting that back in there so that you tie this whole form of doctrine together. See, He started out kind of pointing you at that, but He didn't tell you exactly how to labor with Him. So now we're covering the office of giving. And you may find ways to exercise that office in the midst of this assembly. In fact, you may find many ways to exercise that office. And the accomplishment of God's operation is one of the godly motives that allows us to do that. Now let's move to the next one. Another sonship reason for giving is to accomplish God's will. It is His will for this church to do the work of the ministry. If we're not going to do the work of the ministry, we need to stop calling ourselves a church. We need to start calling ourselves a Bible study. But we really are involved in the work of the ministry, and edification is the main thing that goes on inside these walls. When we get through with this study in this book, we have 2 more lessons after today, we're going to move into that evangelism part, and that's the other half of the work of the ministry. I'm very excited about that. And so anyway, let's look at this next reason here, and that is, I need a godly reason to give. Well, how about Romans 12:8? You're really talking about finding something in the Scripture that tells you what to do, and now you're doing it because that's the instruction that you have from your Heavenly Father. I just shortcutted that and said, because Romans 12:8 says, and he that giveth, let him do it with simplicity. I mean, that's really what's going on with that. And so that list may look like a bunch of different reasons, but really all of those things are connected. Can you look at that list and tell me how those are connected? I mean, they're really not, all standalone with no attachment to each other. Barb? Okay. Love? That's right. Godly charity is all the way through this, right? Look, if you love God, really, because He loves the saints, you would, right? And you would love to accomplish His operations, and you would love to exercise that measure of faith and labor with Him. You'd love to accomplish His will. You'd love to obey the doctrine that He gave you. That's good. Anybody else see anything else? Okay. Other than that? All of those things, look, whenever you get a motive going for something, you understand that every one of these motives are inner man motives. There's no outward physical thing. And that is important for me to bring up, because that's going to make a vital difference about other things that we do and why we do them. I'm talking about just the normal things that saved people in churches all over the world do all the time, but they don't think about it for godly reasons. They just think about it for physical reasons. So I want to talk about that issue. That's part of what I told you that we're going to be covering today. And so, just as you give, no matter in what form it is, purpose to do that, because God is doing something today. People have lots of good reasons for giving, but what we need to look at is, you know what, let's labor with our Father and accomplish what He wants to have accomplished in this world. I just picked that one out of that, but just to say, we're giving to that end. There's a lot of things before you get there that you could stop at, but I'm going to try to warn us about that. And so if you start thinking about it that way on purpose, then there will come a time in which that'll be the default reason for why you do everything. That's what your Father is after, getting us to that place. And so if you forget the right reason, by the way, in your experience, is it possible to learn something out of the doctrine and then later in your everyday life during the week, you don't even think about that, but you kind of respond to a situation in a totally different way? Sure. It's a process. So what do you do when that happens? Do you throw in the towel and say, well, I can't do it? Well, no, you keep at it. You just correct that motive and you keep at it. See, godliness is not the natural thing for us. And so I don't want you to be discouraged by that. So the why behind what we're doing is always a big deal. And the key to that is being conformed to the image of God's Son. So when we financially support a local church, it is because of something written in Romans chapter 12, verse 8. And that, okay, here's a great opportunity. This is actually very exciting. And I guess I should be hooping it up and jumping up and down at this point. Because what I'm explaining to you, just think of all the ways that you do things that could come under this banner of giving. Giving is a huge banner, and people do it in all kinds of ways. I know we're not there in the note taker yet, but yes, people can give financially. What's another way that people can give? Okay, they can give their time. Give me an example of how someone gives their time. Barb? Yeah, okay. When we had that plumbing issue and Eric comes over and opens up the building and spends his time over here during the week, absolutely. What's another thing that we can give? So our time, what's another one? Okay. I'm really thinking about more of a physical thing. That is right, but I want us to think of, because this is one of the practical offices, I want us to think about it. Huh? Okay, your talent. Does anybody have the ability to do something that might be beneficial to the church? When I first started coming here, there was a guy that used to come here, and he put those doors in back there in the back, and he was a builder. Do you remember who that was, Clifford? I know you were here. You were here from the beginning. In the beginning was Clifford. That is scary, isn't it? So, Linda, do you remember who that was? This was a guy that was involved in construction. He didn't show up every Sunday. But some things were being done to redo this part of the building. So what happened is this wall got put up because there's a whole other section back there that you're just looking up at the, at the I-beams and, and stuff. And so the suspended ceiling, what am I knocking off? Wow. So all of these suspended ceiling tiles and lights got put in, and they needed a door. And so he put that door in, but he didn't put it in during the service. Thank God for that. But he took the time to do that. I'm going to mention some other things. I mean, I guess I could just do it out of order here, but no, I want to wait because there's something specific that I want to say about those. But there's a lot of things that get done that people spend their time or their talent on. In other words, and by the way, sometimes people lend their expertise to something, but it's not an expertise they already had. They went out and got that expertise and then brought that into the local church for it to be a benefit to what was going on here. That's another way to give. Now, we talked about these different ways to give. And again, we're going to be looking at some things as we go forward here, but the why behind all of those is the important thing. And here was the part that I said was very exciting. Almost lost it in that trying to get all of that out. Every time you give, and no matter what way it is, even if you look at it and say, this is a big thing or this is a very small thing, does God only want the big things to be done for godly reasons, or does he want it all done for godly reasons? There's nothing he does that isn't done for the godly reason. If we're going to be conformed to the image of something, that's the way it's going to be for us. So we have to learn that, and you'll get that. But here's the exciting part. Every time you do, if you remember the godly reasons that are behind this and really think about it, I'm not talking about just memorizing some fill in the blank that we did on a note taker. I'm talking about really stopping and thinking about, I do value the other people in this room because they're part of this body of which I'm a part. And I want to value them the way my Heavenly Father does. And when you do that, and you do something, because charity, by the way, is not just nice thoughts, it's what? It's those thoughts being made manifest by our Christ-like actions toward them. And so when you do that, no matter if you think, well, that wasn't anything, it's just a little thing, I want you to realize that every single time you do that, you are furthering the process of conforming you to the image of God's Son. But only when it is done for the godly reasons. You can give for a lifetime for other reasons, and that will not produce the life of Jesus in you. And you'll be doing the same thing. That's how important the motive is. So, having said that, I want to say this. There are some things, like giving, that once we really learn how to operate out of them and we do it for the godly reasons, we are then going to be able to look around and discern other ways to operate out of the office of giving that were not talked to us about at all in the Bible. And so what I'm saying to you is, when God talks about giving, did you notice he didn't make a long list about here's all the different ways you can give, and here's all the different circumstances in which you can occupy an office of giving and give in some way. He didn't do that. You ever wonder why? Because first of all, the needs in one church are different maybe from another church. So that's not a one-size-fits-all. Secondly, some needs don't go on forever. They're just temporary. So the church just needs to function out of that thing for a period of time, and then that's done. And they don't need to do that anymore until another occasion arises, maybe later. So there's no list there for us to be involved in. And so here's what the doctrine is designed to do. It enables you to be able to look around at your fellow members and at this local church and say to yourself, wow, I see another way I can put this office into work. You say, but what if I don't say it that way? It doesn't matter how you say that. Here is another way that I can take godly giving and do it in this area. And that happens in the Bible as well. I'm going to show you a couple of examples of that. And what I'm trying to say is, this godliness is going to reveal to you other avenues to be able to give in a godly way. Through the years, here in Texas, this year we had an unusually cold burst there for a couple of weeks, and normally it just gets cold, but it doesn't stay cold for a long time. But somewhere years ago, we came in on a Sunday, and the rooms that were off over here on the side were all underwater. And what had happened is the pipes that were in that outside wall froze and burst, and then when everything thawed out, the water just started gushing. And so when we came in, all of a sudden, guess what? We're in cleanup mode. I mean, water is cascading down the little step over here, and, which is why we never plug this grate in the middle, okay, because this would be a swimming pool. But, it got cold, and it did that, and so here would be, I'm not trying to use this, you say, okay, so what happened? Well, you know what? People came up here and pulled that cabinet out and then chipped that inside block away. And you know what was in that wall? Little bitty pea-sized balls of insulation, about the size of a pencil eraser. And the whole wall, there's two walls there. There's an outer wall and an inner wall, and the space between them was filled up with these little styrofoam BBs. The same styrofoam that's in an ice chest. And so when we knocked out that inner wall and pulled the blocks out, guess what happened? A lot of little BBs started flowing out of there right into the floor. I mean, they were just going everywhere. I was thinking, how many can you get in there? But you know what? There they were. And so we find the break, patch the break, and you have to say, now I'll be honest with you, when I was doing that, I was not doing it for the godly reason. You know why you know why I was doing it? Yeah, Linda said, because it needed to be done. Because until that gets fixed, we don't have any water. And I want water. By the way, that's not an evil motive to want water. It's just this. Even lost people who have an office building have that reason for fixing their pipes too. Absolutely. So I get to looking at this and I'm thinking, so how do we exercise godly charity in fixing these pipes? So let's take it further. Let's take it further. So we fix the pipes so we can turn the water back on. Why do we turn the water back on? Why do we want water here? Convenience, that's one thing. Sanitation. You like to be able to use those restrooms, right? And you know what? And so what's going to happen? What we're all going to take a break and drive down to the Texaco and line up? People, you know what? If people come here, if you don't have water, do you know how many times they'll come back? If when Rachel first came here, she wasn't bound to us by her marriage to Clifford. She was a free moral agent back then. Do you remember those days? And you know what? If she had come in here and we didn't have any water, she would have been saying to Clifford, who are these people? Well, see, and I'm going to get there. So my point is, why do we want that water? Well, you said, well, okay, because you know what? It's convenient and sanitation, and you want all that. But ultimately, take it further. Why? That's because if people are so distracted by not having that, and they got to go, how much edification is really going on? So we used to say it this way. We didn't think about it quite in the godly terms, but it was close. I used to be and when I went to college, I was a counselor, a youth camp counselor for kids. And that's how I got my tuition paid for the year, is serving at the youth camp all summer long. And kids came in, the Old Time Gospel Hour, back when Jerry Falwell was alive, he had that Old Time Gospel Hour broadcasting. Kids came in from all over the world to go to camp at Treasure Island. It was right in the middle of the James River, and they could come to Treasure Island Youth Camp for free. And so we served as the counselors at that camp. And we used to pay real close attention to making sure the bathroom facilities in the cabins were working and the food was good. Do you know why those two things? Because if a kid is worried about the bathroom or the food, he's not listening when you're telling him about Jesus. His mind is on other things. So you want to get rid of that so that you don't have that distraction. Let's do the electric. Yeah, we pay the electric bill here. And if you live in Texas, you want electricity because you want air conditioning. How many days would it just not be possible to come in here and sit without air conditioning and have a class? Okay, okay. All right, almost a year, right? So, and you say, well, why don't you just meet in the parking lot? Do you know why? Because if you don't have electricity, we can't put this message out to the folks on Zoom. So now it's just a bunch of people sitting there. By the way, the parking lot, is that better? I'm just saying, that out there you could probably fry eggs on the hood of the cars in the summer. But is it about just, well, we want to be comfortable? No, it goes beyond we want to be comfortable. What does it go to? We want edification to take place. Nobody is going to pay look, some of you, maybe you were in service during the Vietnam War and it was hot and humid over there. A good friend of mine, Leo Albritton, came back from Vietnam, and you know what? He loved the heat. He got so used to it. He would sit, your car would be sitting out in the parking lot, be blazing hot. He'd get in his car and he'd go, heat. And I would think, you know what? Something's wrong with you. You remember Leo? Yeah. And he would do that. There's a lot of us that don't have that kind of range to be able to function. My wife, for example, has about a 5-degree range. And if it moves above that, she is freezing. And if it moves below that, she's burning up. But she's not the only one in this room. And you know who you are. So I'm just saying. Hey, use your microphone next time. So, okay, so now, what I'm saying is, this is really about the edification work. See, you have to go beyond the way the world thinks about it. Yeah, we just want bathrooms at work. Of course we do, but the whole reason we're here in the first place is not just to have workable bathrooms. The reason we're here is so that edification can go on. Now you're back to the godly reason. You understand what I'm saying? And so if you love the folks that are here and you want their, I erased it off the big part of it, but I can take it back when it says, that we value and esteem them because we want them to be edified, then we think about the things that are necessary in order for that to fully take place to the best of its ability. And that needs to be the thing that is in our mind. Once you see it, I think you understand it. It's not rocket science. It's just taking it beyond the normal physical things that we see to now the spiritual issues, which is the whole reason we're doing this to begin with. And so now back to your note taker. So let me just walk you through this real quickly. So here we go. And I got to get back over from that. So the examples of godly giving motives for the electric bill. Well, first thing is we get electricity, so we can have lights, and those lights are important. I mean, I could just as easily say, so we can have air conditioning, and that's important, or heat, and that's important. But we have lights, that's important. But the why is so that we have the ability to read the Word so that we can be edified in the end. You can stay home and read the Word, but when we gather here and we go through the edification process, that's really what we're after. Here's the next one. We need electricity to broadcast those sessions live. If we don't have electricity, nobody's following us on Zoom. Nobody's hearing that. Here's the next one. If we don't have electricity, look, and by the way, I got to give you the why here. Why do we care about broadcasting our sessions live? Why do we care about these folks on Zoom? Yeah, because we value and esteem them as remote members of this assembly, and we want them to be educated and edified unto godliness. That's got to be the motive. That we love them enough that we want to do that so that they can actually benefit the way folks do when they're sitting here physically. And so now we'll go to the next one. And so we have electricity so we can record the sessions. Mark's sitting back there, and he's going to make a digital recording of this thing. And why do we want to do that? Well, I mean, you could say, well, because if we digitally record it, then someone can come along later. And so here it is. To assist people who are already listening to this, but who need to review the material. They have the ability to go on Vimeo and watch all of these lessons again. But if we don't have electricity, we don't do any of that either. By the way, Neil told me a couple of weeks ago, he got a little message from Vimeo that said, and by the way, I'm trying to think how many lessons this is. This is, I know we've had some ABCDs, so this is 8. So maybe 12 or 13, and then we had 3, that's 16. So we're probably somewhere around 21 lessons that we've been in so far, somewhere around that, maybe a little more. He said, Vimeo contacted me and said, we've already had 1,000 views on Vimeo. Now, yes, that could be somebody watching more than once, but I don't think Sandy is at home watching our video 1,000 times. But what I'm saying is, if we don't have electricity, we don't have the ability for anybody to go back and look at those. And then the other thing is, how about people who are going to come along behind us? We're not going to reteach this live. That's why we're archiving this and recording this. I know this isn't anything you couldn't figure out. What I'm trying to get you to think about is we think, well, we want electricity because, you know what, we want to be cool and we want to have light. But it actually goes beyond that. It goes to our own edification. It goes to being able to entertain the folks on Zoom. It goes to being able to have an archived recording of this. It goes to a lot of things that we're actually involved in and we should be involved in. Here's the next one. Oh, by the way, I got a verse here to interrupt. 1 Timothy chapter 4 and verse 8. And I want to read this to you because, hold on, I'm getting kind of ahead of myself, and I didn't mean to do that. Let me just look in the notes and make sure I'm where I am supposed to be. Hold on, we'll read that in just a moment. I have something to say to you first. So let me wind this up. So an example of how to pay the electric bill with godly charity is that any time you give, you are giving with the understanding that you're doing all those things that we talked about earlier. You are helping the edification of your fellow saints. You're accomplishing your Father's operation. You're responding to that measure of faith that He dealt to you. This is how you demonstrate your love for Him, because you care about the things that He cares about. And so it may be hard at first to think, how in the world do I give with charity when all I'm doing is, well, this is how. And this is what I'm trying to get us to understand. So now I want to talk about how we translate these right motives into the heavenly places. This is a question that I've gotten quite a bit. So we're supposed to learn how to deal with the sufferings of this present time, which are those things that happen to everybody, whether they're lost or saved. It's just part of living in a fallen world. And for those sons and daughters. But let's forget about the sufferings of Christ for a moment. Let's just talk about those ubiquitous sufferings of this present time that happen to everybody. You're sitting at a red light and the guy's not paying attention, he rear ends you, and now you know what? Your neck and your back is all out of whack, or you fall off a ladder, or something happens, you know what? You catch pneumonia. I mean, it's just part of the sufferings of this present time. You may say to yourself, I understand that I am supposed to utilize the doctrine to be able to go through that in a way where I'm not whining and complaining and questioning God or griping about it, but I should be able to go through that suffering of this present time in a way that glorifies my Heavenly Father. But the question I get asked is, how is that going to translate what I'm doing? How's that going to translate into the heavenly places? Because I'm not going to catch pneumonia up there. And I'm not going to be falling off a ladder. And if I do, I'm in a glorified body. It won't. You know what? It won't affect me. So how is learning all of that? How is that going to translate into the heavenly places? And I have an answer for you. And the answer is found not in focusing on what you're trying to avoid, but what you are trying to produce. What are those sufferings meant to produce? Godliness. Let me ask you this. Is godliness going to translate into the heavenly places? Yeah, see? Don't think about the negative. What I'm trying to avoid these sufferings. Okay. But when they happen, how is me toughing it out going to... Because as you respond properly to the sufferings, the character of God's Son gets built in you, and that does translate into eternity throughout the ages to come. Everybody see that? So what we tend to do is we tend to focus on the things we're trying to avoid. Again, not the godly reason. Think of the things rather that are being accomplished. I'm being conformed to the image of God's Son. There's the inner man issue, see? So you can do this with every single thing that is happening to us. And so because godliness, as Linda said, take a look now, 1 Timothy 4:8, for bodily exercise profiteth little, but godliness is profitable unto all things. Look at this. Having promise of the life that now is, godliness has value now, and of that which is to come. Man, you just can't get anything better than that. That's where the focus needs to be. So now let's talk about the various ways of giving. Oh, boy. Let's talk about the various ways of giving. Here they are. three ways that we're going to be able to give. Number one, money. Everybody knows what that is, and we've talked about that. And number two is time. You guys mentioned this. I told you we'd get to it on the note taker. And so a while ago, Richard mentioned the coffee. Can I just tell you that for years, Milton comes up early and he makes coffee. Easy for me to overlook that. You know why? I'm not a coffee drinker. But he's always here and always doing it. And for the folks that are coffee drinkers, that is a pleasant thing for them that they enjoy. And Milt would be the first to say, do you have to have coffee to be edified? No. But you know what? If he makes that coffee out of his godly love for the saints, isn't that another legitimate way to manifest that? Absolutely. And you know what's happening to him in the process? Every time Milt makes the coffee, because he is reminded of how he values and esteems these saints, the character of God's Son is being built in him just a little bit more, and a little bit more, and a little bit more. You know what that will do for you? Now, it's kind of unfair for me to say this because depending on the day, sometimes Milt has really tough physical issues to go through. And there are days that he is here, but he can't just get up and walk around like normal because he's just not steady on his feet. But you know what? When you realize that these little things that I'm doing are actually building the character of God's Son in me, you know what that kind of thinking gets generated? You know what thoughts get generated in you? Can you guess? If I'm Milt, and I know every time I do that for the right reason, the character of God's Son is being done in me, I don't really want anybody else to do it. I want it. Yeah. You know what? I'm being a benefit to everybody as a happy way that God constructed all that. At the same time, I'm being transformed. I'm just going to keep doing it. Now, sometimes I'm not saying that to put Milt on the spot because some days he just can't. And so when he does, he gets Barbara to do it. Or Mark. I don't know. People tend to get sick when Mark. Anyway, so someone else can do that. But look, even if you took it over, if Mark took over the coffee one week, you guys would be gone next week. If Mark does the coffee no, Barb's going to come back and do the coffee though, right? Okay. So if Mark does the coffee next week, if he does it for that godly reason, you know what he's doing? He's one more little step of being conformed to the image of God's Son. One more time he responded properly to the doctrine. One more time he had the right motive. He had the godly motive behind what he was doing. And it doesn't have to be a big thing. You don't have to pull people from a burning building for it to count. All of it counts. And by the way, that's why it not only counts when it's godly labor, it also counts when it's just godly living. Can you do some godly things up here that really may be nice for everybody, but they're not especially tied to an operation God is doing? Of course you can. That's just godly living. Don't get the idea, the only time I need to be godly is when I'm just doing these operations. No, we're godly all the time. At least that's the goal. So here's the next one. Talent. We kind of talked about that. And the next one is resources. And you can talk about, you can read in the notes about that and kind of get that on your own. I know the timer's gone off, but I need to give you this last note taker because there's not enough left here for us to push this over to another lesson. So, figure 4. Giving as godly living. Giving as an expression of how we value and esteem others, which is not directly connected to the accomplishment of God's operations, is considered to be part of our godly living. In verses 9 and 10, you're going to get instructions about how to do that. There is going to be an operation over there, but you're going to start seeing ways that you can utilize godliness in your every time you're with the saints, that you're going to be able to do that to their benefit, and it's going to be a great thing. So now let's talk about the godly labor, and I think I miswrote it on your notes. It should say figure 5, giving as godly labor. Does it say living? Yeah. I just imported the deal over, and I've just forgot to change the title, so it should switch to labor. And here it is. Giving as an expression of how we value and esteem others, which is directly connected to the accomplishment of God's operations, is considered to be part of our godly labor. And so here's the verse I end with. Remember I told you earlier that once you really get functioning in the office of giving, you see all the different ways in which you can do that, even the little ways that someone may not even think about, but you begin to do them for the godly reasons that they are, and you begin to be transformed by that. What happens is you begin to look out and you begin to see other ways to apply these principles, and the Bible didn't necessarily tell you anything about that. And you say, well, Mike, how in the world do you know that it really happens like that? Because it happened with the Ephesians and it happened with the Thessalonians. Let me just show you the Thessalonians verse to end up the session. 1 Thessalonians 4:9, he says, but as touching brotherly love, ye need not that I write unto you, for ye yourselves are taught of God to love one another. Do you know how they got taught of God? Well, first of all, they got godly love generated in them through the things that Paul taught them. That was the doctrine. But you know what? They were able to take that and take it further because they were able to see how they could apply that in other ways that Paul hasn't even written to them about yet. And he winds up saying, I don't even need to write to you guys about this because you're already doing it. That's what we want happening with us as well. Look, this is adult type instruction. That's why we don't have a tutor and governor. God's not trying to correct every little thing that we do. If we don't, by the way, will we not hit the nail on the head sometimes as we're trying to live out of this doctrine? Sure, we'll miss, of course. God's not up there going, oh, let me correct that. God's not, I know people think he's not a micromanager. He's not flipping out every time you didn't say it exactly right or do it exactly right. You know what he realizes? You're just not there yet. It'd be pretty hard for me to have been mad at my kids when they were 5 years old because, you know, they can't spell anti-disestablishmentarianism. Pretty unfair, right? Because they can't work geometry. They're just not there yet. So our Heavenly Father, I think, treats us just the same way. And so part of this doctrine enables us to be able to figure things out as adults, to figure it out. Not have to be told every little thing to do, every little part of your life. God has prescribed it and ordered it, and then he will send you directions on how to do it. Yeah, look, I'll be honest with you. When I came here to be your preacher, God did not tell me this is where I needed to come. So I cannot blame that on him. And you know, and because he's not prescribing that. You get yourself in a real knot by worrying about that kind of stuff. There's too many decisions that you make in your life. You can't possibly get them all right. And if you think that you're in the perfect will of God, you know what? It would have been a cosmic accident for that to have happened. So so anyway, we're now I've said everything to you that I wanted to say so that we can engage in the office of giving. Is there more that could be said about it? Absolutely. But I think everybody gets it. So this is the end of session 8.